welcome back, Podcast Universe. So, yeah, I've done an introduction. I think that went okay. I'm kind of new to this gig, so bear with me. Hoping that some of the content that I produce in collaboration with friends and loved ones who are really awesome, clever, and have some really insightful, novel ideas will be a blessing to all of you. I'm going to talk to you now a little bit about... Oh, hang on, I nearly actually forgot. One thing I didn't say in the introduction was to do with the Law of the Land podcast show. Was two aspects to the name that were really outstanding, that were kind of inspired from my wife and myself, to do with being the law be with you. And the one aspect of that was looking at it from a Christian point of view of when it says the Lord be with you, which is a really common greeting you see in the New Testament in the early church. And the second part of that, which kind of really also fit from what we're interacting with as a show, especially the genre of superhero genre, comic book and science fiction, was from Star Wars, which is the Force be with you. And we thought that in that name, both the sort of the Christian aspect of it, of what we're doing, and the engagement with contemporary culture, especially in the guise of science fiction, especially Star Wars, which is a genre in its own right, we felt that was kind of reflected in the name as well. So just putting that in there as well. Anyway, little thing that I wrote, little article I wrote, little piece I wrote to Geeks and Gamers, which they probably looked at, and I'm not sure if they did anything with, but I just thought just be an interesting sort of thing to do. So give us a second and we will start. Right, welcome back. The argument for the sequel trilogy era. A little bit of context. This is talking about Kathleen Kennedy and her era of Star Wars. She took over from Luke Skywalker, I was about to say. She took over from George Lucas, who is the originator of Star Wars. He wrote the Star Wars original trilogy after being turned down from doing Flash Gordon. Bit of knowledge for you there if you're ever in a situation where you're in a pub quiz and that question comes up. He wanted to do Flash Gordon. That project didn't get off the ground, and so he decided to write his own bit of science fiction called Star Wars, and the first movie was called A New Hope. Now, interestingly enough, George Lucas, he got inspired by lots of different ideas. One, namely Flash Gordon, as we've just mentioned. I think he was a big Flash Gordon fan. But also he was very influenced by westerns, this kind of spaghetti westerns that you get in that sort of from the that era of kind of Clint Eastwood, and even earlier westerns as well than the Clint Eastwood ones, to be fair. And also some of the ideas that you get in the Japanese sort of genre storytelling as well. And so Star Wars is often referred to as almost like a western set in space, and I think when you see the ideas play out in the Star Wars films, it's so apt and so correct that you really see that come to fruition. The ideas of Flash Gordon, ideas of futurism, the technology, the ships, the robots, and the different droids that you get in the Star Wars universe is very much a sort of motif that you see play out in Flash Gordon. But also the ideas of the planets that you see in Star Wars, the very vivid desert planets, and even the sort of planets that you see that are very different as well. But especially in the desert planets, you get that feel of the resistance, whether it be sort of led back in the day by Leia and whatnot. You see a ragtag bunch of freedom fighters and resistance that look like they've got worn out technology, and there's a kind of, it's aged in a sort of very interesting way to reflect and give a vibe of the Wild West, and you really do see that in A New Hope, especially with Luke Skywalker, and you see really on his home planet, you do tend to see that sort of that it's not polished. Things do look old. They do look like they have to be fixed. You do have to kind of work with technologies that are not always gleaming and shiny in that sort of realm. And the beauty of that is it gives it a sort of earthly feel to it. It feels very much like there's a history to it. It feels like every set piece, every ship, every droid, every city, there's a story behind it. It's got a history behind it. We're zooming in at this point where Luke Skywalker is about to go on his journey, but actually you can tell the way it's designed, the way it's brought forth as a narrative, you can see clearly there's a pre-history going on there, and we're just coming in as we see these two droids, R2, D2 and C3PO. We're coming in on their journey now, and George Lucas has often said this, that the original, especially the original trilogy era, was really told from the droids' point of view. They were watching and on this journey as they were interacting with Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia and Han Solo and Chewbacca. You kind of see, but you see it from their vantage point. It's their story in a way. But anyway, we're not talking about that original sequel trilogy. We're talking about the most recent one, which is Kathleen Kennedy's one, and this one is a bit more controversial than George Lucas's one, although George Lucas's one was controversial in itself. This one was really, and it kind of finished recently with the Rise of Skywalker film. There's a lot of kind of politics that have gone into these new films that weren't really in the original one or even the prequels. A lot of identity politics. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit now. In a universe far, far away, I was hyperdrived up to another level. Star Wars was finally back on the big screen and in live action. December 17th, 2015. My wife and myself had gone about recruiting for the Resistance. We got a group of about 20 or so to go to a midnight showing of this huge showcase. The excitement was palpable. I went out and brought a lightsaber. Well, in fact, I got a relative to buy me one. But I was a kid again. The heroes I grew up with, the noble Luke Skywalker, the roguish Han Solo, feisty Princess Leia, and charming Lando Calrissian. I was hoping Lando would be in The Force Awakens. He actually isn't, but I was hoping he would be. But these guys were back on stage again. The most refreshing angle was the newbie characters though. For those of you that don't know, if you're not into video games, you might not know what newbie means. It just means new. But often in video games, it's used as an insult. I'm not going to go into that right now. Anyway, these new characters, especially Finn, Rey and Kylo, all three seem to be a fresh addition to this awesome franchise. Surely this new sequel trilogy era couldn't fail. Everything was in place for a new generation of industrial light and magic to fill the silver screen. A new order to be confronted, new villains and heroes, new planets, cultures, and a new John Williams score to take us to light speed. This was taking me back to the 80s, the era of superheroes in the Richard Donner trope. Hope in a silver age of looking into the sky and feeling like you can take on any empire with the help of friends in high places. I was taken back to this glorious feeling. And George Lucas, in virtue of setting up Kathleen Kennedy and the said Kennedy, were the pilots of this Kessel Run, and I was on board The Force Awakens. J.J. Abrams was the director that Kathleen Kennedy chose for the first film of the new sequel trilogy. George Lucas, the godfather of Star Wars, had passed over his lightsaber to Kennedy after after selling his industry-changing Lucasfilm to Disney in 2012. After mixed reviews of this prequel trilogy, Kennedy, who had been at Lucasfilm for years herself, and also worked with Steven Spielberg as well for a long time, had passed over and retaken on the mantle. Abrams himself was already known in science fiction circles for his work on hit TV shows such as Lost, Alias, Fringe, as well as the Star Trek reboot. I expected lots of screen glare, a famous Abrams filming technique, and lots of big sequences. The Force Awakens has some good action in this regard. As a movie, it was a decent opening movie of the sequel trilogy. I was disappointed in Finn's arc, but more will be said about that in my accompanying review. As for the legacy characters, Luke's entrance was brief but dramatic, and the John Williams soundtrack made that scene the best one in the movie for me. I wanted to see more of Luke as a kind of Superman type figure. I was grateful that I got to see quite a lot of Han Solo though, and General Leia was interesting as well, a great and beloved character, but I felt Luke was underutilised. As for prominent female characters, which Kennedy often speaks about, Rey's arc was very dramatic, from a feisty scavenger girl to one of the most powerful Jedi ever seen in the space of one film, but with no Jedi training. A lot has been said on this, and I will be saying more on this in my alternate review of the same material. One positive that could be taken from this is that Rey could be seen as a powerful archetype that women and young girls could potentially look up to, although she does seem very perfect. Representation matters, and in our current age of identity politics, Rey could inspire girls and young women to realise their inner strength. After all, Rey overcame the odds, having no family and being from an impoverished desert planet as well. So, on the surface of things, she certainly ticks some boxes in our new enlightened era. That is where we go now to talk about the new antagonist. Star Wars is very unique in that way, and a lot of us will remember some of these sort of antagonists that are in Star Wars, and we're going to really sort of go into that right now. Star Wars is a unique franchise in respect to the way the fans love the villains, if not more than the heroes. This is due to the most famous film villain of all time, Darth Vader. As a kid watching this tall, intimidated, masked Sith Lord, it was startling to behold how immense he was, and really not that comparable to anything else in the science fiction genre. His slow breathing from a masked facade, looking more like a machine than a man, but knowing a man was under that suit. His tall stature and very authoritative, commanding voice, and that voice is a great voice as well. Fans loved Vader as much as they were intimidated by him, and he certainly knew how to make an entrance. Look, I am your father. That was me, by the way, guys. That wasn't Darth Vader. Fast forward to the new protagonist, and there was some cool stuff about Kylo Ren. His mask paying homage to his grandfather Vader. His very funky cross-hilt lightsaber, and a really tall stature made for an impressive sight. Adam Driver, who plays Kylo Ren, is an excellent actor. He brought some emotional range to the role, especially in his iconic confrontation with his father Han Solo. And it was really interesting what he did when we see him as a really conflicted soul being wooed by the light side of the Force, which I thought was quite original. And if you think about that from a broadly Judeo-Christian cultural perspective, we are used to our archetypal hero being tempted to do wrong. We kind of think of the original sequel trilogy, you do think of Luke Skywalker in that situation. He was a noble character with a good heart, being seduced by the dark side of the Force. So it was interesting to see the reverse. Kylo, who was really working in the dark side of the Force, being tempted and wooed. Well, not even tempted. Tempting, I think, would be the wrong word, but certainly being wooed by the light side of the Force. And that was very, very interesting. I think Kylo, though, was very much a difficulty. There was a difficulty with Kylo in terms of when he took his mask off, it was immediately less intimidating. And I think him having the mask on, which was a nod to Vader, made him a very much more interesting character. And then when that was taken off, it didn't quite work for me. But he was there was some good stuff about Kylo, though, and he certainly, as an actor, is a very good actor. So this has been my more positive review of the sequel trilogy. I think for me the highlights of it was the build up to it, and some of the good action and ideas that we saw in The Force Awakens. I think that film wasn't amazing, but it did it was a decent opening film, and it was a good platform film to build the sequel trilogy from, and it really could have elevated to great heights. But as we'll talk about in my next review, we'll see that it didn't really live up to that really great potential that it started off with.